I think the market's waiting for some kind of move one way or the other. Are we going to start loosening policy again, tightening, and until then, I think it's stuck in this range.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics as we are continuing our coverage of the events in the economy and how that impacts the silver world in particular. Obviously, a lot going on. We're only a week away from the Fed's latest meeting, which will provide another data point in how things shake out with the rate cycles, which have obviously had a big impact on the metals. Interesting that for the past year, we do have a higher silver price, even in the face of interest rate increases. Of course, that was following quite a plummet in the silver price last year at the beginning of those rate increases, but we'll dig into that and a lot more. I'm joined by my good friend David Stein of Kuya Silver today, who obviously is seeing this from the front lines. So it'll be great to get your perspective on some of the particulars on the silver mining side as well. And David, great to have you back in here. How's everything going with you today?
It's going well, thank you. Yeah, just grinding away on the front lines. But yeah, no, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's mid-September. We're recording Wednesday, September 13th. And just about a year ago, we were at the Silver Symposium in Spokane, Washington, where we had a couple grim days there as silver even got below $18 one of those days. We can see September back here leading into October and got back to $24 silver at the beginning of the year, dipped down below 20 up to 26 and has been floating back and forth in a range since then, which somewhat mysteriously seems to coordinate with whether the banks are getting long or short silver, pattern that has accurately predicted a couple of these past few humps. But David, on Wednesday morning, we had the latest CPI showing that inflation, at least according to the government numbers, came in a little bit hotter than expected. Obviously, something that is behind all of the latest gyrations from the Fed, which again, we'll get more color on next week. But any thoughts on what we've seen in the past year? A little bit surprising, perhaps, in some ways to see relative to where we were last year, even with rates going higher than expected and so far staying there longer than expected. But what would you say about what we've seen in silver in the past year leading up to where we are today?
Well, I think silver's been resilient when you definitely when you look at the when you look at the rate tightening cycle compared to how people would have looked at silver, and and we could lump gold in there as well in past cycles. I think the fact that that silver is in the low to mid 20s. You've got gold 1900-ish as well. I think tells you that there is strong underlying demand for these metals awaiting the next crisis. Really, that's the main reason to own these, is for that portfolio protection. And so I think there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of gyrations, as you say, at the very top, but underlying, I think the fundamentals are looking really strong for these metals and for silver specifically. And that's being reflected in the price where it is today. I mean, we'd all like it to be higher. I certainly would like it to be higher. But again, given the context of where we've been with the rate tightening cycle over the past year, I think having silver at bouncing between $23 and $25 is okay. And keep in mind, the U.S. dollar has been very strong as well. We've only had really one kind of shockish type of event, which was the Silicon Valley, which was, again, when we look back, a relatively minor event compared to some of the other ones we've all lived through in the past 20 years. So Uh, so that, that's where it got pushed up a little higher to $26. And but I think the market's waiting for, some kind of move one way or the other. Are we going to start loosening policy again, um, tightening? And until then, I think it's stuck in this range.
I think that makes a lot of sense because, we had the 75 basis point hikes last year and got through the brunt of those. And while there's been some tightening this year, it hasn't fortunately been at quite as significant of a pace. And it feels like people are still wondering, all right, when are we going to be done? When are the rate cuts coming? Which even the Fed has spoken of the rate cuts coming with their summary of economic projections. So it seems whether we like it or not that the sideways action, I mean, silver about 75 cents lower on the year, gold higher on the year, perhaps somewhat fitting. And you mentioned something that reminds me of what we were talking about before we started, where silver has that history of spiking up when there's something that sparks that fear impulse. We saw that with a lot of physical buying during the banking crisis earlier this year. And obviously, we saw that with what was going on in 1980 and 2011 when we got those spikes to $50. Interesting if you consider those spikes due to real fear of instability in the system. Perhaps maybe that's what silver could be expected to do at this point, because, all right, maybe if you really have problems in the US, which I don't think we know when things are going to unravel yet. We see the debt loads, we see the dynamics with the Fed losing money on their balance sheet, banks run into trouble, new Fed facility launched, things get delayed longer. I mean, I guess that's what the Fed's going to do, where they're probably not just going to sit there and let the thing collapse. Maybe that doesn't change the longer term picture yet. If you consider maybe there's another spike like this in our future, which I think if you go far enough out, however far that is probably a reasonable expectation yet. Looking at the M2, found this chart, thought that was interesting, where silver has somewhat followed the increase in the money supply. I mean, here we are $4 or $5 back in the year 2000. So a 5x, 4.5x up to where we stand today, maybe a little lower than that, 24, 26. But has silver filled its role over time, would you say?
Yeah, I think if you look over the very long term, I think you'd have to argue that it does. And yeah, I mean, when I look at this chart, I definitely see, something that's gone up. You're right, 5x since the early 2000s. It was under $5 for part of that time. Since 1960, it's probably up 20x. So, you're looking at something that does over time, kind of keep pace with inflation at least, and then at times it outperforms. So again, if you look at this chart, you will see that while the trend looks pretty consistent with the US M2 money supply over this 40 or 60-year period, there are long periods of time where the silver price is one side or the other of that orange line. So it spent quite a bit of time above it in the late 70s, early 80s, then below it for about 20 years or so, then above it for a while, and we're back below it again. So I think the trend is up when you look over multi years here, and you can see with the money supply, which is a proxy for inflation, that a silver rally over $40, that would just get you to the M2 line right now. And as we've said before, there's times where it spends years above that line. You can see that here. That's where you would go to 50, 60, $100 from here.
Yeah, and like you pointed out, even despite some of the sell off over the past year, gold's still at 1900, near the top end of its range, and silver. I don't think most people often think about this, but again, and rightly so, we have the $50 price spikes in mind, and that's a big part of what I think drew a lot of us into silver. Although, if you take those price spikes out, obviously 1980 was very brief. 2011, we did see silver in the 30s and 40s for most of the year, but those aside, we're really at the high end of the range of where silver has been historically. So suppose a matter of perspective on these things. Although, in terms of people wondering, well, okay, could we see silver go back into the teens? Obviously, last year we did, and certainly that's possible. Yet, one of the things underlying that is the cost of production, which silver generally has not for longer periods of time stayed below, is rising as well. I've seen some estimates this year for all-in costs of around $21, $22. I know obviously you're closer on that side. Curious if those sound about right, or any thoughts on what is actually costing primaries to get silver out of the ground at this point?
I haven't done a thorough analysis on this, disclaimer, but anecdotally, I definitely have seen financial reports that are coming out recently from some of the bigger producers that would have costs in the well into the 20s, and so I think that's the right ballpark. Probably is if it's 20, 21, 22, it's in that ballpark as an industry. And so you're right. I think that is something that does put a bit of a floor on the price. Maybe not in the very short term. Obviously, things can happen, but over the longer term, it does provide a floor, because obviously you're not going to get any new supply. And I would argue we're probably not really getting any significant new supply happening right now anyway. It's not, the price of silver isn't enough to sort of get over the hump of the higher cost of capital that the industry's been facing lately. So you might have a project here or there, but for all those projects, keep in mind that the industry is always in a natural state of decline, because the easy ore is mined first, the higher grade ore is mined first in almost every mining project. So that's you tend to, unless you keep reinvesting, you tend to have a natural decline in all. Goes for all mining commodities, actually, all mines,
Right.
but silver especially. And so so the only way to shock the patient back awake again, where you actually have rising supply, is to provide a lot of capital to the industry. And right now that's not happening. So and it hasn't been happening for a few years. So I think on that side, if you're a silver investor, you're in really, really good shape, where that's something that you just don't have to worry about probably for the next 4 or 5 years, because it also takes a long time too. Even if the price of silver went to $50 tomorrow, and a whole bunch of generalist bankers, investors, hedge funds started throwing money at us, it would still take people 4 or 5 years to build a new mine or expand a mine, get permits, all that kind of stuff. I'm generalizing, but that's
Right.
that is the reality.
Yeah, and certainly we've seen that over the past year has been a tough year for a lot of these silver mining equities, especially the explorers and developers. What do you think it's going to take for that to change? And also, do you think that we've seen the bottom? I mean, most of the sector has really gotten pummeled, where you could make the argument that things are cheap now. I think there's a degree to which, given the volatility in silver, we haven't seen money come back into space, because especially now down around $23, it's like, oh, well, what happens if silver goes down to $20? I think there's the fear of that in people's minds, but do you think we've bottomed out yet, or what do you think it takes to change that?
My feeling is that we have bottomed, and I say that just as someone who watches the market and the silver stocks very closely every day, including my own. But I watch a peer group of about 30 companies very pretty closely, and how they trade and where they're at versus their highs and lows of the year. And it seems to me like I mean, I see some green shoots in how the stocks are trading, but they're still very small green shoots right now. A lot of companies are still very close to their 52-week lows, even lows that they would have hit earlier in the year. So when silver price was even lower than it is today, so no one is getting excited about a $23 silver price and investing, in stocks right now, in general. But they're also not going lower either. So that's good. That's a good sign, I think, that we may be at the bottom and on the on our way to a turnaround very soon. In terms of what will get the sector going, it's really got to be flow of funds. So we need to see rotation into metals and mining, precious metals, silver specifically. We need to see that rotation happen, from probably tech, really, is where a lot of the equity money is parked right now. So, and of course, we don't expect all the thousands or millions of Microsoft investors to go and buy Kuya or any other silver stock tomorrow. But even if a tiny fraction of those guys start moving their money into our tiny little sector, it will make a huge difference, a huge positive difference, because things are really cheap. The market caps are really, really small. So, I mean, in most cases, in these companies, you can't even put $1 million to work without doubling or tripling the share price. So, think about that at a big scale. That's if you have to allocate $5 million or $10 million to the sector. Obviously, you can go to bigger companies like First Majestic, etc., and that's fine. But that all does eventually trickle down to the micro caps and the small caps, like us. So to me, it's the flow of funds that's the big missing ingredient. We've got great investors and a great, universe of mining specialist investors that follow us and rotate around from company to company as news happens, and that's great. We love those guys. They do, they're all really smart, but we need the pie to get bigger, not the same pie to just be sliced different ways. We need the whole pie to get bigger in order to see really exciting equity returns. But when that does happen, the returns will be huge, because our sector is so small, it's so beaten up, that, as I said, a relatively small allocation of capital, $500,000 here, $1 million there, you're going to see stock prices double and triple and more, go even higher than that very, very quickly.
I think that's reasonable, especially as you pointed out, a lot of especially on the junior side, prices substantially lower even than a year ago when we did have that $18 silver. So I get it, it's tough when people have been beaten up, although perhaps we are close to the bottom. Another thing that you talked about in terms of more mainstream institutional money coming in, certainly we have not seen that on the silver side. Here is the weekly transparent silver holdings. Think of SLV. This includes the COMEX as well, PSLV, but all those ETFs, and blue line here representing the amount of silver, which even during the rally of the past year has continued to come out. So we'll see when it turns. I wonder if that's not another thing that is tied to waiting for some resolution out of the Fed whenever they are finally done raising interest rates. So sometimes
It's interesting, Chris, that the timing of that drop, which is still going on, is really exactly around the the Fed pivot to tightening rates in 2022.
Yep, we can see that right when the silver price and the gray line began to fall, and yeah, that was when it's quite a active time period because you had the breakout of war just earlier there, and then, as you point out, really we've seen a lot of silver come out of those funds. Although one place that we see silver continue to go into is China. Here's an interesting comment from Bai Xiaojun, who does some great research from a Chinese perspective. And he mentions China understands it completely relies on the silver bar market. If it completely relies on the bar market, prices will skyrocket. So it skips the silver market and purchases silver ore, sand, and concentrate directly from the miners. However, this will lead to a supply shortage of ore for overseas refinery, resulting in a gradual depletion of reserves. I think suggesting that First Majestic could perhaps be the type of company getting a call. Have you heard anything along those lines of companies going direct to consumers or other groups like Bai is suggesting here?
Well, that's a fascinating comment, to be perfectly honest. I think where he's seeing that is likely with Chinese miners first and foremost. And there are many or several, I'm not sure how many exactly, but there are small silver miners in China who could be selling by silver ore sand. What he means is that would be crushed ore that has not yet been concentrated, but probably high grade from a high grade silver vein mine, something similar to what we have in Bethania or our Silver Kings project. They have high grade projects like that. Silver Corp is a Canadian listed company that has some high grade silver projects like that in China, located actually in China. So that's what they would be buying is the crushed silver ore. And then concentrates, those concentrates tend to be controlled by third parties. So we would sell our concentrate to a third party metals trader, and then they can sell it directly to China or to a refinery in Tokyo or Japan, I should say, Korea, wherever they want. And so that would be, you'd see less impact of that on the actual miners themselves, at least for now. Now, there's nothing stopping a miner from selling their own concentrate. They just tend not to do it because it's a whole other business with its own infrastructure that's required. So bigger companies would do that, like Teck, like BHP, etc. But most smaller companies will use a third party for that.
Okay, makes sense. And again, he did mention the gradual depletion of reserves. He had an interesting piece out a couple months ago showing the current reserves. Again, that does not include resources or other projects that are out exploring, but we're on pace for depletion of current reserves in about 6 years. So again, another factor in addition to the cost of production that would suggest that might not see silver going substantially lower for an extended period of time. One last thing that I wanted to run by you, found an interesting comment out of JP Morgan, no less, the other day. And in terms of banking issues and the Fed and where things might be going forward, let's take a moment to listen to what Bob Michelle from JP Morgan had to say here.
Not believing that they may have to cut rates.
Your previous call at the start of summer was cuts by September. Clearly, they won't be cutting a week tomorrow. I want to understand from your perspective what's going to deliver those cuts. And when you're thinking about yields we haven't seen since 06, 07, some people might be listening this morning thinking, well, bad things happened after that. Do bad things happen now? And of course, I'm not saying on the same scale to the same magnitude of what we saw in 08, but are you anticipating bad things?
So at the start of this year, we thought something like recession by the end of the year. Then we had the regional banking crisis, and we thought, well, that's going to bring recession forward a few months, so they should be cutting by September. And I think what we looked at and probably got wrong was the backstop that the central banks, the Fed, put in place, the bank term funding program. And we likened it more to a Bear Stearns bailout. It probably was more like TARP. It just created more liquidity, backstopped the entire banking system. These things are still hiding in plain sight. The regional banking crisis hasn't gone away. I wish you had asked Bill Dudley when he was patting himself on the back in the Fed about, no, this is all in the rearview mirror. Really? Look at the Bank Term Funding Program. It's quietly increased in size the last 9 consecutive weeks. It's at 108 billion. So the regional banks are not working down their borrowing, and that's coming in at 5.5%. That's telling us that they still need cash available to meet depositor outflows. So I think there are plenty of things out there that are still.
So we'll stop that there, but again, suggesting that we have not seen the end of the banking issues. And again, when we look at the response to that was more backstopping by the Fed, which taken down a long enough timeline, we see that while things continue to be papered over, the end outcome that I think draws a lot of people into silver and leads to some of these spikes like we've seen in the past, then add on the inflation going back up, the higher oil price, all of these other things, whether we're not at $50 silver today, I think speaks to some of these issues that are coming down the road and haven't been resolved. And any thoughts on that one?
Well, that is the first time I've seen that video, and it is very refreshing, actually, to hear that kind of frank analysis, and it really makes a lot of sense. I mean, I guess the way to interpret that is that the next crisis is just around the corner. We just don't know when. If it'll be, tomorrow, a week, a month. But the system is still shaky. The fact that the Fed has to, create these programs to behind the scenes to basically prop the banks up is should be very concerning for investors. So I'm thinking not too many people saw that, watch the Bloomberg show anymore, which is too bad.
Well, that's why we got it covered here today. And yeah, I thought it was some interesting comments and indicative of that. We have not seen the end of some of these things. Again, with the rates staying higher for longer, another potential hike, not making it any easier out there. So either case, David, before we wrap up, was hoping you could give us an update on how things are coming along at Kuya, where we've been doing some drilling at the Silver Kings project, amongst other things that are going on, but perhaps you could let us know how things are going there.
Sure, happy to do that. We're simultaneously running 2 district scale projects. So Silver Kings, as you mentioned, we will be starting to drill, very shortly, later this month. And that's the program that we, announced a few weeks ago, and we've been just doing all the preparations behind the scenes. So very excited to get onto that. And it's really, frankly, a really important program for us because we established a new discovery in March, April of this year, in a brand new area, not near any historical mines, which is typically where people have drilled and explored in this cobalt district or camp in the past, is just near existing mines. So we found a brand new discovery. Hopefully I'll be calling it a deposit pretty soon. And it's not associated with any historic mining. Now, we only really hit it with two of our drill holes in the previous program. So that tells you that there's something there, but as to how big it is, we need to prove that to the market. In this bear market, nobody's going to give us any credit for anything until we actually show it. So this is the program that will show the size and scale of the Angus vein discovery, as well as the potential for veins close by to it, which we've talked about and shown people in the past we think are there, but we haven't drilled them in the right place yet to get any significant mineralization. Whereas now we know where to drill, we can go back and target those areas, and I'm expecting we'll get some very good results there. So that's very exciting. with Bethania, we are also, I think, going to surprise the market this fall by having some news that will allow us to move forward with that project. And in a lot of ways, that's an easier, lower risk project. I know it's it's in Peru versus Canada, but it's a past producing mine, so there's already decades worth of work done for us there, and it's just a matter of getting back in there and under the right circumstances starting production. So we'll want to have an offtake agreement there. That's something I referred to, and when we were talking about the silver market in general, you were talking about concentrate and third parties. So that's something we're looking at and very close to wrapping that up or being able to announce something there. And that will, in my mind, be the catalyst to move forward with that project back into production. So we'll so stay tuned. We have not forgotten about it. We haven't had as much news on Bethania lately, just because Silver Kings has been a little more active, and we've had the drilling going on, and it's been easier, frankly, to raise money for using the flow through mechanism in Canada, which incentivizes exploration. It's a great system for if you have a project in Canada. Obviously, it lowers the cost of capital hugely. So we've been taking advantage of that, and that's really the main reason why we've had more news at Silver Kings. But this, Bethania is still our flagship. It'll be in production way before Silver Kings will, and we're very, very excited to have some news on it in the next few months.
Okay, and that update will shed some further light on when to expect going into production at Bethania. Will be the next update there.
Well, I think once we have that offtake agreement in place, I think that will allow us to give a bit more of a firm timeline. That may not be the next announcement. That's why I'm sort of phrasing it like that. But that to me will be that will allow us to get a little bit more granular as to the timing. But just whenever that is, if that's in later this month, October, hopefully no later than that. But even if it's November, keep in mind that this is a very quick project to get back into production. We're from the point that we pull the trigger, it's only a few months, and we'll have production there. So we're in a great position there. Just a matter of getting a few final corporate development things done there.
Well, I know you'll be excited about that. I know the Kuya shareholders will be excited about that, and perhaps you could just let folks know where they can find you and how to best stay up to date so that when that is announced, they can be aware of it.
Well, the best way is to subscribe to our email list, as you've already done the work for me there. Our website is great. I think kuyasilver.com. Great way to start if you're new to the company. You can see our projects and obviously sign up for the email list. Then we just we'll spoon feed you the information, and we don't spam people a lot, just when there's major announcements, press releases, that kind of thing. And then we do have other ways to follow us on all the social media as well, and there's links to that on our website. You can get all those from our website as well. Also, you can use that contact tab to send us a message, book a meeting, etc. So lots of ways to contact us, and you'll actually speak to someone senior management. If it's not me, it'll be someone very senior, and we love to talk to our investors and our potential investors.
Well, David, appreciate that, shedding some light on the dynamics within silver, the silver mining stocks, and also congratulations on continuing to move things forward. And seems like you made quite a bit of progress with both the projects there at Kuya. So David Stein of Kuya Silver, great to catch up with you as always, and we'll have to do this again soon, my friend.
Thank you very much, Chris.